Hello, this is PsychicSploob here, just with a little note before the video starts. I noticed while I was editing that I really did mess up a couple words pretty badly. Like, I had no idea I said the words I did. I'll be sure to put a little note on the spots I messed up just so you know what I actually mean. It's like, you know those moments whenever your friend is like, wait, what did you just say? Why did you say that? Or, I think you meant to say this because you said that. You're like, no, like you're convinced you didn't say that? Well, this is like that, except I caught myself doing it. It's actually it's pretty interesting. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Have fun watching the video. Ah yes, No Man's Sky, also known as One Man's Lie. No Man's Sky housed one of the biggest backlashes in gaming history. In a lot of cases, we're kind of used to the idea of these big corporate entities lying to us or giving us straight up awful products. We're used to EA, Activision, and Ubisoft games being anti-consumer, and when a little indie studio, Hello Games, started to do it, we lashed out, understandably. And this wasn't just a little anti-consumer, it was straight up fraud. The nickname was completely justified. Upon release, there was a mountain of refunds and serious conversations about the game being falsely advertised. I don't believe anything came from those, confusingly enough. It was stuck in a whole lot of people's heads, mine included, that Hello Games had profited from lies and deceit. This confused the hell out of me at the time. I saw all the reviews, all the interactions Sean Murray had with the community, and he seemed like he had nothing but good intentions. That this all really was coming from the heart. I remember once he expressed how it was his childhood dream to create a game where you're completely immersed in a sci-fi fantasy world all yours to explore. That fantasy is nearly universal to all sci-fi fans, and no game yet has emerged to properly live up to that fantasy. I had no reason to believe he would build all of these interactions on the foundation of fraud, which is why it came as such a surprise to me when the game released the way it did. Of course, you've already heard about the numerous features the game lacked and numerous lies that were told. So, given this information that would naturally lead you to believe he was genuine, and with the addition of the fact that they kept supporting the game with free updates years later and negated all of those missing features, the question must be asked, was his deceit intentional? I don't believe so, to a degree, but I do know he still actively deceived us. He failed to make it abundantly clear the game would not come out anywhere near finished. Apparently, development went through lots of problems, floods, lack of funding, huge pressure from Sony and the gaming community for it to release as soon as possible, etc. And all of that combined with the fact that they had no PR team created the disaster that was No Man's Sky. No one would have looked at that game and thought, yep, and this is a finished product worth $60. Seriously, how that ended up on store shelves for $60 is baffling to me. It's actually just straight up outrageous. So the outrage in the community was completely justified. Not the death threats or any of that bullshit, of course. I shouldn't have to say that. Sean Murray lied and deceived the public. While not completely intentional, he could have come out at any time and made a big announcement that the game would not release finished, and there's no denying there's some level of intention behind that. He himself said recently that he would have taken back all of the interviews and all the things he had said if he had the choice before launch. He recognized people would be unhappy with the product at the time because the things he said were going to be in it weren't. But this story has a happy ending, so stick with me. After launch, Hello Games and Sean went silent for several months, only coming out of the shadows every now and then to announce a new update. The silence just stirred things up a little more. Some people saw the silence and thought they had just tucked their tail between their legs and given up. Others saw it as unprofessional and annoying. I'm in the latter boat. This just made their PR even worse and did more harm than good. Honestly though, there could be a ton of variables that contributed to them being silent. Could be they were ashamed, or they didn't want to interact with the internet at all because of the terrible way the internet as a whole typically conducts itself. Or it could be they wanted to speak with actions rather than words. I feel like that's the more likely scenario here, because well, that's certainly what they went on to do. After the backlash, Hello Games and Sean Murray were completely overwhelmed, stressed out beyond imagination. They had an enthusiastic internet mob on their asses at all times. They had god-awful PR, they had gotten death threats for things as simple as butterflies not being in the game. They even had a bomb threat called in on them. They described it as being as bad as it could get, you really can't help but feel bad for them, even though they provoked the gaming community as a whole. But they just plowed through all the bullshit and kept improving the game. That's the part of all of this that really is stunning and kind of even admirable. That takes a lot out of a person to do, and this was a small team, a handful of people. They could have just run off with the money and never looked back, but instead of doing that, the team just kept with it, despite the huge baggage that came with sticking with it. That's only something a team does when they're particularly passionate or inspired. It could be Sean Murray and the team really did just want to create the dream sci-fi fantasy game in every sci-fi fan's heart. And the more I think about it, the more believable that becomes. This vision Sean Murray had is what made the game so appealing, and it's this shared vision that created such a wholesome community in No Man's Sky. Everyone was similar in that they loved the idea of traveling in an infinite universe as a lone space traveler. So much so, they'd play an unfinished game and put up with the false advertising just to get to live out that fantasy just a little bit. Even if it was as wide as an ocean and as deep as a puddle. That's the situation I found myself in over time. Say what you will about Hello Games, but you cannot deny the fact that they nailed that vision right on from the start. Granted, there was lots of room for improvement, and I mean lots, but improvement is what Sean Murray and Hello Games had next on their list. Now that all that has been covered, let's get into the actual game as it is today. I've logged about 250 hours on No Man's Sky. Yeah, I get it. Why did I do that? Well, this isn't really a game that ever actually ends. You can soak as much time as you want in this game and still feel like there's more you need to do. In my case, it was just trying to get even more rich, build a collection of starships to see what they all specialize in, and go to the center of the galaxy. And after that, I planned on going to try to get a new S-Class freighter. You might be saying, well, 250 hours and you still haven't achieved the stuff you wanted to do? That sounds super tedious, and I won't lie, the game really is tedious. But that's not the reason I haven't gotten the stuff I want yet. I was too busy messing around and doing all the other things the game has to offer, and holy hell, there's a lot of stuff to do in this game. The main story itself can be 40 hours long, or longer. Then there's the base missions, side missions, Atlas Path, etc. We'll talk about the quality of those missions later, though. This game doesn't really require a lot of brain power to play and enjoy. Sure, the beginning of the game to a new player may be a real cognitive exercise, but it stops being difficult whenever you remember to read your objectives and learn how to use and manage your mission log. It's very easy to get confused and overwhelmed at first, but after you learn the ropes and get a feel for the game, it really stops being a challenge. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you. I quite like it personally. It's very meditative. It's the kind of game you boot up and listen to a podcast or some music while playing. Don't get me wrong, that's not to say you won't be thinking when you play this game. Quite the opposite is the case. A lot of this game is played in the inventory. Your exosuit inventory is the most vital tool for your survival in the cosmos. You'll use open spaces to craft products of all kinds, install upgrades of all sorts, and just collect resources and hold items. The larger your inventory is, the more successful you'll find your travels, and the less often you'll need to travel to markets. So it's vital to upgrade it as much as you can as soon as possible. That's actually one of the first things I did in my playthrough. Before the next update, you started out with an absurdly small inventory. I almost question how I even got off my first planet then. But now you do start out with a pretty sizable exosuit, and upgrading your inventory still does provide a nice sense of progression. Progression in this game is nearly completely tied with the inventory system. That being said, it's a pretty complicated system and very rewarding whenever you learn your way around it. You can install 3 upgrade modules of whatever class for whatever you wish to upgrade, each taking up an inventory slot. You cannot install any more than 3 of those or you will overload the tech, and as a result you will receive no benefits. But you can create and install extra upgrade technology if you have the blueprints, and it will not overload the tech. If you put all these things in a row, the upgrades will glow in color and you'll receive a hefty buff to the stats those brought. All of this info applies to your exosuit, starship, freighter, and multi-tool. As complicated as this may sound, it feels very natural to pull off in-game, though confusing at first. The progression isn't exclusive to the inventories on your equipment though. Lots of starships and multi-tools vary in stats and ranks on their own, C-Class being the most common and S-Class being the highest tier with the best stats. The most interesting form of progression, though, is in the base building. Whether you're building your base on your freighter or on your planet, you'll find it's very easy to get invested in if you aren't turned off by the horrible grind. Personally, I prefer building on my freighter because while it's more limited, I don't have to grind as much to build what I want. The grind to build on planets takes forever, and after next, everything seems to take an unnecessary amount of time. I'll get into that later though. Along with just the satisfaction of building a base, you get these missions that could unlock you some new gear, plants to farm, and even 3 different exocrafts. But as of making this video, there is a serious problem with farming. Hello Games has changed the growth rate to a ridiculous amount of time. Farming was an aspect of the game that kept me playing, so I invested a lot of time into it. I feel like I just wasted a ridiculous amount of time getting invested in something that they would just take later and destroy. This made the game for me. If it's not broken, don't fix it. I actually feel wronged because of this. The farming was great the way it was. This idea was straight up stupid, and I can't bring myself to play this game anymore because of this. And that's just a microcosm of them wanting to make everything in the game take longer. Before next, scanning times were much shorter. You could mine things much quicker. You could do everything faster. But an attempt to draw out playtime so that they can brag about impressive numbers online has made this game super irritating to play. Even some missions put you on timers. This doesn't make me want to play the game. I know this is done to encourage me to come back later, but this makes me never want to return to the game at all, because I'm afraid I'm just gonna hit another wait timer and the game is gonna go tell me to fuck myself. Besides that absolutely catastrophic failure of a gameplay decision, there are more things to do besides wait for shit to happen, such as the campaign, if you want to call it that. It's more of an excuse to keep playing. While it's not presented in a way that's anything more impressive than boring, it still does help develop an atmosphere for the game, albeit that atmosphere is just ambiguous as all hell, just like their marketing. I really don't think this is how a game should do world building, by censoring certain words and saying random nonsense. That's just aggravating and unprofessional. It's actually super demeaning. It's as though their philosophy is, let's be as ambiguous as possible so that they have no idea what the hell is going on, instead of actually telling an engaging story because, well, that's too hard. That being said, there are characters, and those aren't bad. They have intentions, beliefs, circumstances they find themselves in, interesting dynamics when you actually interact with them, the basics, but the amount of times you interact with those characters are so slim, it's a shame. They could have done something there and made the story at least a little interesting, but they ditched that idea and replaced it with more vagueness that leaves you feeling more confused than you were before you indulged in it. You do find out a lot of lore and elements of the cosmos, but it's nothing particularly engaging. The story should not be the reason to play this game. You will be disappointed, I guarantee it. I would have rathered a short, intriguing story as opposed to a demonstrably long one that ultimately acts as a 40-hour tutorial. I am very happy I got bored of the story and started doing my own stuff and found out those aspects of the game on my own. Otherwise, my impression of this game would have been even more bitter than it already is. Moving on to the exploration. Exploring is quite fun in this game, especially once you've transcended the survival aspect and gotten an exocraft with a scanner. A lot of the points of interest are very samey and boring, but you can get pretty well rewarded and find some useful stuff doing it, like blueprints, nanites, and other valuables. The most engaging part of the exploration to me was finding the knowledge stones and expanding my vocabulary so I could understand aliens better. That aspect of the game really was neat. Exploration with the buddy makes the process a lot more interesting. You'll find some monster nests, fight those off for their eggs, you might get into a battle with the sentinels, as I do a lot, and ask your buddy to provide air support. There's just not a better feeling than pulling that off. Getting into your starship and flying into space seamlessly while being chased by sentinels never gets old. The exploration is cool and all for a bit, but the real reason to play is the thing that stays present no longer what activity you're doing. The immersion. The most valuable aspect of this game by far. Few games really create the feeling of immersion to the degree this game does. I don't even want to compare it to anything simply because it's really on its own level. Everything is seamless. Everything you do is built on a foundation of context, gameplay-wise at least. I wish I could say the same about the story. You really, truly do feel like you're living in a sci-fi novel. A poorly written sci-fi novel, but one with a pretty cover. And more importantly, one that really holds true to the fantasy mostly all sci-fi geeks share, which is the idea of being able to explore and interact with a vast universe at their own discretion. This, coupled with the immersion, is a brilliant idea, and in execution works very well. This aspect of the game has been nailed really nicely. I do think there should be more meaningful ways to interact with the universe, though. As of right now, the game lacks a lot of that, which detracts from that feeling I think they're trying to encapsulate. All in all, this game is certainly special. Some would argue in more bad ways than good, but despite all the controversy, the product we currently have is a solid one. But because of its lack of a solid compulsive gameplay loop, it's a very niche game. Only a particular kind of person is actually going to like it. It doesn't help that the game actively discourages you from playing by making everything way too long to do, something that wasn't as big of an issue before the next update. This is actually the thing that breaks the game for me. How can I play a game knowing everything I do is purposefully drawn out just so the playtime numbers the game has is more impressive? It makes me feel like I'm being manipulated, and I'm not wrong in thinking that. We have been manipulated by them before, purposefully or not. It happened. This is not the kind of thing you do after you just got through a scandal all about manipulating people. I like No Man's Sky as a game. I don't plan on playing it anymore because the credit output of all my farms has been nerfed to hell, everything has increased in time to do, and I wasted a shit ton of time because of that. The game doesn't want me to play it anymore, so I don't plan to. If you have a high bullshit tolerance, and if you have that infatuation with the sci-fi fantasy I had described earlier, this is the game for you. You're going to have a blast, as I did before Hello Games started trying to make things longer to do in a selfish attempt to increase playtime numbers. I was going to rate this game, but my reasons for disliking it are pretty subjective, and I understand some people have a higher bullshit tolerance than I do. More power to them. I have many problems with this game on the basis of principle. I didn't mention the countless game-breaking bugs because they're still fixing them, but they pissed me off. The artificial increase makes me mad, the exploration leaves so much to be improved, the narratives are just exclusives to play longer rather than interesting stories to get engaged in. It's just not a finished game at all, and if it is, it's a bad game, and Sean Murray himself says this. With that acknowledgement, why isn't this game labeled as early access? Hello Games really needs a team dedicated to public relations or something, because they have a serious lack of transparency, which is a shame, considering that I really want No Man's Sky to be enjoyable, and I did find it enjoyable for quite a long time. All of these little things just add up and give me a bitter feeling of it all. With that, this has been PsychicSploob. Peace out.